Bob Bakert with Jonathan Kreisberg on Jazz Guitar Today. We're glad you're here. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
We appreciate it. We want to talk to you a little bit about your career, what you're doing now, your influences, all the stuff that everybody else has asked you for years. But I thought we would bring it up kind of up to date a little bit. I've been watching you play and listening to you play. You're very prolific on YouTube, lots of YouTubes. And a couple of things that I've noticed about your playing, a lot of people play jazz and they play rock, and they put that together and they call it fusion or whatever you want to call it. And I know that Alan Holdsworth is a big influence on you. But you also bring classical into it. I mean, I watch your technique and I listen to some of your lines. I listen to the way you move the bass lines. I listen to your voicings. I listen to all that kind of stuff. I listen to the rhythms. You're very rhythmically sophisticated. You talk about rhythm in ways that, like conical, you remind me of John McLaughlin's discussion on conical. When I'm watching you play like a standard, and I'm listening to the choices that you make, and I'm knowing that a lot of guys, that's the only choice they have. That's what they're going to play. What you're hearing is that's it. That's what they got. But with you, I know that you have tons and tons of stuff. And I think the biggest problem that I would have if I had your facility was just restraint. Because of all the rhythmic choice you have, the melodic choice you have, the polyphonic. I mean, you have a tremendous quiver of guitar stuff to draw from. So let's talk about that a little bit. How I know that you studied classical, but where did you come from? How'd you make it happen? Tell me a little bit about your guitar maturation.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is thank you, because that was a great setup. Well,
is any of it bullshit?
No, it's always hard to take compliments in general, but I thought it was interesting because you touched upon some stuff that I think about a lot. Right. I actually think that in music in general, irregardless of the style, there's always going to be different philosophies about playing. And some are very conscious for the player, and some are just subconscious or unconscious decision making. And I think it's a really big subject, the idea of when we play, how comfortable are we with what we play? Like, how well do we know what we're going to play before we play it? Like you said, how many choices do we have? And I think there in jazz, it's more obvious in music that's kind of composed music, classical music. It's obviously very, it's all about interpretation. It's not about what you're playing. And even that, when you listen to Glenn Gould's original performance of the Goldberg Variations, and then you hear the one he did as an older man, they're totally different. And it's really brilliant to hear how that can happen. That's both the same guy, And then there's music like flamenco music, which I've always loved, and was really surprised when I learned that, like Paco de Lucia, the stuff he's playing is basically composed, and that was like mind-blowing to me. Like, it sounds so improvised in a way, I mean, I hear that there's passages that, like, okay, that sounds like part of the tune, What I've been told is that most of that is almost 100% composed and then performed in a way where it feels, sometimes it's like sections that he can kind of mix and match, I guess. But that was really interesting to me. So, I mean, the thing that it brings us to, obviously, is jazz, which is improvised music. But I think even within that realm, where I consider home, for me, everything I play is, at this point in my life, is kind of through the prism of jazz. That's kind of how I would, if I had to describe myself, it's like my way of thinking really comes from bebop, even though that's, I wasn't a kid born in the 40s, or as a young man learning in the 40s. There's something about that rang true for me. It kind of combined, when I was younger, I was studying some Bach and Baroque, playing, and I started to get into that, analyzing that way. And then when I learned about jazz, that came together in a way where it made sense to me. It's funny, I always think of that as almost like one lineage, and then this kind of rock thing that I grew up on too is almost more connected to like modal playing or Indian music or something, because it's a different way of thinking of harmony, but I always feel like my main thing is coming from this bebop way of thinking and then letting all this other stuff that I like or have played into it, you know, and then going through that prism. So, but what I was going to say is that even in jazz, back to that subject, there's so many ways, levels of that, of how comfortable are we with what we're playing? Like, how well do we, you know, are we playing a phrase we've played 100 times before? Are we playing something totally fresh? And I think there's all kinds of different angles on that. You know, there's some guys that really stick in a certain length, like almost like a certain period. You know what I mean? I mean, or even a certain player. I mean, there's a sax player I played with years ago who just sounded like he just loved Coltrane in 1958, and he just, or not even 58, even more like
59,
56. No, a
56,
little earlier, like
56.
before Giant Steps, in, you know, 56 or something, like when he was
Yeah.
with Miles, you know. And that's, and even that, he could be creative within that, you know. Granted, a lot, it wasn't that creative because a lot of the lines were exactly literally those lines, and the sound was literally that. But even then, there's phrasing like you, like a classical player, almost like, you know. And
Right.
then there's some players that every time they play, they want to treat it like it's the first time they've played and completely blow open the possibilities, you know. That's amazing too. Sometimes, and sometimes it's not, you know, because it's really a risk, you know.
You don't know. That's the fun of it.
So yeah, so I mean, for me, I've always considered myself, even though I'm a fairly imbalanced individual, I would say that like you know, the balance act for me is something I in that respect. I have certain things that are definitely isms, you know, like you hear it and someone might say, oh, that's kind of like a Kreisberg thing or whatever, you know. But then I have also stuff that's completely unplanned all the time that's in my playing.
Right.
So I'm trying to find a little of both because I think that one defines a style, and also you can get into the interpretation and different ways to use the material in all kinds of different situations. You know, that's up to you to really know the concept you're using, you know, not
Right.
just for it to be a guitar player, the lick, you know, it's not a lick at that point, it's a concept. If you learn to play it in every possible harmonic situation and rhythmic situation, then it's become something you can play with like a toy, you know?
You sound like my jazz teachers.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I am a jazz
Got to
teacher.
learn all 12 keys.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's just the beginning. But I mean, basically, that's, you know, it's just interesting that you mentioned that in the beginning because that is, you know, when I play with Nelson Veras, this duo we have, you know, it's like he really will blow apart stuff and like he'll play totally different on two different nights. And
Right.
that's really, I admire it. As he probably admires some things in my playing that are a little more specific or kind of language
Right.
oriented, you know. So yeah, it's really it's interesting though. And there's some players that they can just work with so little and make it sound so amazing that it makes you wonder, well, there's also something about that, about being very concise and saying, well, this is the language I'm going to deal with.
Right.
And sometimes, a lot of times, players that do that don't literally, they don't say that consciously. It's just, that's just the way they think
That's
of
just doing it.
music.
Yeah.
You know, it's a language and it's a language of a specific type of language, you know. This
Sure.
would be, you know, like great bebop players or guys that kind of are playing in that kind of 60s soul jazz style or something. You know what I mean? I
Right.
would consider those guys that, and they do it so well, you know, that you can learn something from them every time, you know. So for me, I admire that. It's just
Right.
that what I'm trying to do is respect that stuff, but also push into some different realms, you know, without leaving this respect for this tradition, this great language, you know.
Right.
That's my concept
I
basically,
think
you
it's
know.
evident in your playing. I mean, what I hear a lot of things going on. I hear a lot of rhythmic choices in your phrasing that's not normal. It's not something that other people do. I think that if you've got a signature that I'm picking up on, I mean, everybody's probably got their thing. It's the rhythmic choices that you're making in your phrasing that's a little just it's just unique to you as far as I'm concerned. From
Yeah,
what,
and that's one of my, you know, tricks, you know, is
yeah, well, it
I take something that's familiar and I'll
yeah,
use rhythm or I'll use harmony or different melodic twists and turns
right.
to
It
kind
jumps
of,
out at you.
yeah, make it sound just like timeless, but also I'm trying to make it sound also, you
Fresh.
know, a little fresh. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And I think that's a good way to describe your playing, or one of the descriptors is that while you're playing steeped in the tradition, you're bringing a fresh coat of paint to it. And that's probably a horrible metaphor and analogy.
No, well, first of all, again, thank you,
Yeah,
because
but
that's kind of in a way what I originally was unconsciously trying to do, and then over time it got more conscious about that it was I think of music a lot of times like a timeline, and we're here, right? And I'm trying to go back, and the further I go forward, I'm trying to go farther back too. So I'm going back, checking out stuff,
right.
as far back as Gesualdo, which is even before Bach, and go forward with ideas of what's happening now and ways that I can contribute somehow, humbly,
In your shows and the music that you do, how much of it is what I would call composed in terms of your improvisation? How much of your performance is composed versus how much of it is improvised?
In the strict sense of what composed means, none of it is composed,
Well, let me reword it. Let me rephrase it. How much of it is where you're literally jumping off the deep end, and how much of it is you're
I mean,
the
people that play with me a lot would probably say that there's certain tunes where maybe I have like kind of a game plan of like some story I'm trying to tell with that tune, that they know I might build it to a certain thing that happens when I'm finishing off the solo or something like that. Or I may start with a certain kind of at a certain place in this, in the tune where I just want it to kind of break down or something. Even those things could change, depending on the gig. I might have some tendencies. A lot of those tunes, I'll have certain concepts that like I said before, I've worked out to a point where I can improvise with those concepts, and I may use that concept in that. Not like a specific, line that I'm necessarily planning to use. You know what I mean?
Let's talk about your tone a little bit. What a great tone. I mean, I'm blown away with that. It's you're using an ES-175 and a deluxe reverb and a what?
Well, I use, when I'm on the road, a lot of times it can become a little tough, but I've kind of, at this point, I have a favorite setup, which is usually if I have my way, I'm going to have a deluxe reverb reissue, 65 reissue, which I think is one of the best new amps, and that's got a very organic tubey kind of sound, But I also like a kind of sterile polytone sound too. When I'm practicing, a lot of times I'll use a polytone, but on the road, it'll usually be a stereo setup of those two amps. And for me, if I had to describe the main thing that I get from each of them, the polytone is just more controlled. It's very flat, and it's like a very even sound. And for a tube amp, they're really clear, I mean, for a solid state amp. And whereas the Fender, is obviously more spiky, it's going to have more kind of organic reactions. It also has a nicer feedback, because sometimes I use feedback actually to my advantage. A lot of the sustain that I get out of my guitar, people don't realize it's actually feedback. So that's better with the tube amp, With the polytone, it's just going to be, a big low-endy kind of explosion.
Everything we love about tubes is what you're discussing.
Yeah, and it's also what you can hate, because I just find that the combination gives me more control too, because I can sometimes bring one amp up and the other one down and get it, change. And phasing is a huge thing. You've got to be able to flip the phase on one of them. I used to do that by hand in the back of the amp, which is extremely dangerous. But
only you.
Yeah. That being said, I hear the thing that mono has a vibe too, and that's
absolutely.
That's really a nice
Are you actually running in stereo? I mean, are you running like a stereo reverb?
I use my old Alesis Nanoverb to switch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
That's the problem with most modern reverb pedals, is they're making them mono, which is idiotic in my opinion. Because
you don't get the big
I mean, that's
sound stage.
If not, I mean, if you want to get a spring reverb sound, that's fine, but why do you want to get a spring reverb sound? The reverb is not supposed to. That's the funny thing to me. I mean, I get it because the vintage guys want to sound like that vintage sound, but the whole idea of this reverb in the first place was to sound like ambience, and they did it with a spring, which was kind of caveman stuff. It's like,
who would have thought that up?
It's like eating a salad with a rock fork or something. You know what I mean? It's like, so to me, with a digital reverb.
Wait, we got to get that quote down. It's a a spring reverb is like eating a salad with a rock. I got to
No, with a
remember that.
rock fork, right?
A rock
Yeah.
fork. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, that's even better.
Yeah. But I mean, I get it because it's a sound, and when you hear
Yeah,
Grant Green with that spring, it sounds pretty damn amazing. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
I was gonna say a lot of people have made some pretty good sounds with it,
Yeah. No,
but
I
if you
mean,
want that big soundscape, if you want that big thing, and you spread it out.
well, it's just my point is it's culturally we're used to it. We associate that with the sound, but actually
Right.
it's weird. It's not more natural. It's actually more natural. The digital thing's more natural because it's actually using samples to recreate what it would sound like if you were playing in a big hall. You know what I mean? So it's actually sounds more real. The sound, if you came from another planet and you heard jazz, you'd say, "What's that weird
Yeah.
reflective thing that's going on there?" It's like some of those plate effects. Like they love them, but they're weird sounding. I mean, if you they're
I
not
I
natural.
I think you're dead on. I
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
agree with you.
And of course, I love those sounds too.
Yeah,
So
we all
it's
do.
it's but I guess yeah, for me, I'm trying to create a little organic, natural thing, and to me, the stereo reverb thing really puts it in a place. So
Well, the bottom line in all this is solid state stereo tubes and all that is that you get an amazing tone. I mean,
oh well, thanks. I
your
mean,
tone is
I don't
great.
always agree because I'm very picky, and that's why
I hadn't noticed that.
I'll say for me, it's there are times where it's to a fault, where I'm thinking about it so much that it's taking my head out of the music, and that's where when I have to say, I've learned to relax a little over the years
So
about it.
let's talk about your guitar, and we'll talk about your pedal board a little bit. So you're using a 175,
Yeah, I thought it was older all these years because my year had a strange serial number that could
right?
easily be read wrong. It added like a letter or a figure or something.
Right.
This one year they did it, and I found out, oh, it's actually that year. So I
Wow.
always thought it was around my age. Anyways, it's not far off. It's a 1976, and that's it on the wall, and it's been around. I've been playing it for a long time, man, a long time. I mean, when I was younger, I had a few guitars, including I was playing a Strat at the time, even when I was playing jazz, and I must have been about 18 when I got the Gibson,
Right.
and
You've had that guitar that long?
yeah, and it became my main guitar within a year or two after that, and that's pretty much it. And all these years I've been getting lots of crazy sounds out of that guitar just because it just felt like home to me. Even though it was odd maybe to get some of the sounds that I was getting on that
It's
guitar,
funny. I mean, I listened to you play with overdrive too, and some of your stuff. Where you're almost playing. You're playing a definite overdrive tone. And
Yeah, and those sounds, I could have gone to another guitar, but instead I just kind of committed to trying to get a better
it
sound.
works.
Well, but it didn't always. I mean, I had to go through a lot of experimenting to
Oh,
find
well,
out
whatever you're
how it works.
doing. And the cool thing about a 175 is the way that neck it sits. It's right here,
Right,
and they're really
right.
responsive, and and you can visualize everything, and they've got
Oh
so
yeah,
much
and the
going for it.
175, it's so balanced. That's why when I play 335, I hate that you take your hands away and the guitar will just flip right off. Great.
I can't play a 335 for that reason.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They just it doesn't work. But the 175 is I've got some friends that have got them, old ones like yours and older. And every time I pick one of those babies up, it's like an old shoe. It just feels
Yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's really cool. And the interesting thing is that it's not known as an instrument that's married up with a pedal board.
No, I mean that's what I mean is that's the thing that I kind of figured out over time is a way to get different sounds out of it, just by
Give up,
necessity.
give up the goods, bro. What you doing?
Oh, I mean, just a myriad of stuff. You mean as far as
Well, your pedal board. What are you
oh,
using in your
what I
pedal board?
run through? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's always changing a little bit.
Of course.
Um,
What is some of the biggest things that you've discovered about using a 175 with your rig that gave you the pedals that what were the challenges that you overcame and
yeah.
that
Well,
kind of
I'm still working on it, by the way. I mean, it's
yeah.
definitely there's a lot of things. Actually, in COVID times, there's a lot of experimentation about to happen. I'm working with a few different companies on some pretty interesting things. I'll say that one of my secrets is learning how to use like I just said, like about the feedback, using the
Right.
guitar as an organic kind of an instrument, using movement with the instrument as part of expressive capabilities of it. And
Right.
a lot of that has to do with positioning between the amps in a certain way, using it for certain kind of spatial relationships with the amps and the venue, to get.
What's interesting about that is scaling that up. If you go to a bigger stage, you have to keep in mind that you want to be within this many feet of your
Oh,
amp.
I've learned a lot about that. Yeah, I mean about using monitors. Jazz musicians aren't very good with using monitors.
Right.
And I'm kind of as crazy as I am about everything else. Now that becomes almost like a third amp when
Oh,
I'm
it
playing
is.
live.
Yeah, it's energy in the environment.
And with Nelson, I use condenser mic on the guitar too. So there's a lot of stuff you can experiment. It's always an experiment, but being meticulous is a big secret. Especially with the
Sure.
with the 175. It's just not a plug and play guitar. You got to find ways to make it work. That being said, then I run through. I'll just give you a quick run through. I use a POG that I go into first usually, which I use for these kind of a lot of the stuff I did on Wave Upon Wave, the kind of octave effects and stuff like that. Then I go into, I'm just taking a look at so the next thing I usually go to after that is the volume, because I always want volume after distortion,
Right.
but before all the other stuff. You don't
Right.
want to be affecting your trails and things like that.
Got it.
I've been using a freeze pedal since they were introduced. In fact, I wrote Boss when I was about 16 years old with a plan to make that pedal. Yeah, and a funny story was I heard from someone that they met someone who worked with them who told them that they tried to make that pedal, and I still don't know if it's because of this letter where I detailed like maybe ways they could try it using. Yeah, it would be crazy if it was because of my letter though.
So then you got reverbs and delays, right?
Yeah. So, but the freeze pedal is a big thing. I mean, the only thing I haven't figured out is the freeze pedal does affect your tone.
Yes.
And I'm actually working on something now, a way that maybe will avoid that. From
The
there.
question is, what are you doing now? What's going on? What's new with you? How's life? What's your newest projects? What's got you all excited? What gets you up in the morning and says, man, I can't wait to get to that?
Sure. Yeah.
What's
Well,
new with you?
yeah. Well, as you know, we're in a crazy kind of once in a lifetime, hopefully, zone. We're dealing with this reality that now we've been, we're talking 4 or 5 months of this. It's crazy. No one expected it would still be going like this. But, I've canceled multiple tours, of course. So that's been, I wouldn't say disastrous, because for me, I'm about to get to the fact that it's actually been an interesting experience. I'm trying to keep a positive outlook on it. And you could also argue that once in a lifetime, we have a chance to be this reflective and have this
Oh,
moment of
absolutely.
almost like a break in life. And for me, it's kind of an interesting time, to be in my 40s and have that go through that. It's like kind of midlife, moment,
Yeah.
So, one thing that I've done that's, well, first of all, I should start by saying it happened right after I released my first live album. Yeah, so that's Capturing Spirits, JKQ
It's
Live.
killer.
Oh, thank you, man.
The
Thanks.
whoever engineered that thing,
I mean, I worked with a couple great engineers, but I was definitely a big part of the
man,
mix
you
down.
guys, the
Yeah.
tones. It's hard to believe that's a live record. It is so freaking good.
That almost makes me want to cry because, it was a lot of work. So
Oh,
thank you.
listen.
Yeah.
For people that know, and there's a lot of people out there that know, I'm not the only one. That record will be really appreciated when people listen to it, man. Because
Thank you, man.
it's hard to believe that's a live record. I mean, the tone and everything about the playing, the performance of it. That's a hell of a great record, man. You should be really proud.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I mean, it was recorded pretty much just like, casually, like, okay, well, let's have a way to document this, because we didn't even know it was being recorded. I had forgotten that it was in the contract that the venue was going to record a board tape, So it was one of those
Wow.
things where we finished the gig and I said, oh man, I wish we recorded this. And the guy who was running the board said, well, what do you mean we did record it? So it was like, oh, all
A
right.
multi-track or just a board tape?
It was it's a multi-track board tape. You
Yeah,
know what
all
I
right.
mean? Like,
Okay.
So it was it was a couple mics on the guitar amps. I think it was.
Yeah, no.
We had 2 overheads on the drums. I think that's it. I don't think we had a kick drum. Maybe we had a kick and 2 overheads. Maybe it was just that. And then the
I don't
bass, we
know.
had 1 mic on the bass and a DI.
But
We had
it sounds
two mics
amazing.
on the piano. So, the thing that I did was we really worked on isolating using frequencies and a lot of phasing
Sure.
and stuff to really isolate and have some control over the mixing. It was
Right.
a real challenge because the bass amp was right next to the piano. So there was a lot of, especially when the tunes got louder. So it was a lot of work, but I just thought the performance, had something that none of my other albums had. And I realized now I may do all live albums. I
And
mean,
I love live records. If I go listen to an artist, and I have to listen to a lot of artists, I want to hear their live stuff because that's what they really do.
yeah, and Lonnie's always, I work with Dr. Lonnie Smith, and he's always told me that. He's just like, oh, the real stuff is in the live recordings.
Yeah.
So, I finally came around to it. When you're as picky as I am, it's hard, but I realized the secret is just record a live album, but make sure they don't tell you they're recording. That's the secret, And you
Well,
don't have time to get in your head, that's you're
play.
good.
You don't think about
Yep.
it. And the other thing is when you're in studio, and you have a tremendous amount of experience with this. I know you got a lot of records, but in the studio, when those microphones, it's like sticking a guitar in your ear.
Exactly.
You
I've been
know,
saying that for years. I mean, I've tried everything, I do the last few records I did, I had the whole, I just didn't use microphones. I used studio monitors set up in front of me with the band and the guitar coming through that. But even that's not quite the same because your amps aren't
no,
behind you.
no, it's not. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, and
Yeah.
but I love to. I'd rather have a little less technical. Not that you are suffering from that because you're not. The record sounds great. I'd rather have it technically a little bit inferior, but the playing be organic and vibrant. That's the
I'm
main.
there now. It took me years to get to it, but I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. And so that's, I'm very excited about that. People have been really happy with that record and excited about it. And that's awesome. And it also kind of documents, really a band.
Right.
The other thing I'm really excited
Club.
about, which I really want to get into, yeah, is
Yeah.
this new membership club, which is something that I never could have done unless we kind of had this corona apocalypse. You know what I mean? It's really
Right.
given me a moment to think about, what education means and what it means to be kind of generous with your life and your music. I grew up in this time where we had guys like Holdsworth and Matheny, and those guys were like, gods. And it was like you didn't really have access to their life or how they were working. It was kind of
Right.
like a mad scientist, And I grew up that way. And for me, the onset of social media and all this stuff, and just seeing, the jury for me is still out on a lot of that stuff as far as whether it's good in general. This whole concept of guys getting on Instagram playing over play-alongs or playing a 30-second
Right.
incredible line or whatever. You know, I'm not really, I'm not convinced it's good. So what I wanted to do was find a way to, basically it's one of those like, if you can't beat them, join them situations in a way.
Right.
Like, okay, well, if this is happening, clearly this is happening. Now we have
What's good about this? What's bad about this? Let me take the good and utilize it to my purposes.
Yeah, I mean, streaming and the whole sharing everything on social media for free, all that stuff it's kind of where it is. I don't think we're coming back from that. So, I said, how can I find a way to kind of rethink this kind of artist behind the wall thing,
Right.
find a way to do it where it's going to be mutually beneficial. Like I'm going to enjoy it because I'm not really someone who cares much about money. It's like for me, it's about the feeling I get from things.
Right.
So it's great that it's going to be something that will add to making a living as a musician at these crazy times. But ultimately, I'm actually enjoying this. I'm enjoying working with students. I'm teaching online. Part of the club is doing that as well as some separate
What is the
things,
club
workshops.
called? What is the
So
club?
it's called Explorations of Note. And it's basically, the first thing I did was a book called Offerings of Note, which was transcriptions and
Right.
compositions that came out a few years ago. And Explorations of Note is basically, it's a monthly membership program, which has mini lessons. It has PDFs of all kinds of stuff I've played. It's got a tune analysis, which is, going through compositions I've written and also ones I admire and different ways to play over certain tunes. It also has a bootleg section, which with a bunch of unreleased stuff and older and even upcoming things, as well as the chance to study privately. So it's a pretty dynamic and kind of open thing once you're in there. Yeah, never did anything like it, but so far it's been great. We have a live meeting every month online, and that first one was really, really fun.
I thank you very much. Jonathan Kreisberg,
Yeah,
thank you very much. I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Had a great time.
Thank you, man. See you. Bye-bye.